Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Looking Ahead, How to Choose the Right Platform for Your High Volume AP, brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by Routable. We have a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. If you have any technical questions or issues using the WebEx platform, please use the chat box and I will respond right away. If you have any issues with audio, please click on the phone icon above the chat window to receive the teleconference info. For those that do call in, to ensure call quality, everyone's lines have been muted. If you happen to get disconnected, you can log on again using the instructions provided in your webinar confirmation email. If you continue to experience difficulty, please email webinars@iofm.com and we will respond as soon as we can. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box and hit send to submit them. At the end of the presentation, we will have our presenters answer these questions. We will also have 5 polling questions during the webinar. A pop-up box will appear when we run each poll. Please choose from the multiple choice answers and hit submit. We'd love to have your participation and insight. This webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. At this point, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We will hear from Mark Brousseau, President of Brousseau and Associates. Over the past 26 years, Mark has established himself as a thought leader on accounts payable, accounts receivable, payments, and document automation. A popular speaker at industry conferences and on webinars and podcasts, Mark advises prominent end users and solutions and service providers on how to use automation to improve document and payment-driven business processes. Mark has chaired numerous educational conferences and has served on several industry committees and boards. He resides in Center City, Philadelphia with his wife and 3 sons. We'll also hear from Omri Mor, co-founder and CEO of Routable. Routable was founded in 2017 by Tom Harrell and Omri as a result of their personal experiences scaling business payments. In their previous jobs, both Tom and Omri built business-to-business payout solutions that serviced business entities as well as independent contractors. In doing so, they realized that the pain points involved in processing invoices and payments were widespread. They recognized the opportunity to build a solution that addressed companies' finance and accounting needs that involved operations and engineering departments. Prior to Routable, Omri spent 4 years in the e-commerce space building shopping carts, designing inventory management systems, and optimizing the consumer checkout process. At this point, I would like to welcome our speakers and hand the webinar off to Mark.
Thank you so much, Jovi, and thank you all for joining us today. So when it comes to finance functions, payouts can be one of the most inefficient tasks that a department might take. And the problem only grows worse as your business grows as well. And today, with the shift to remote working and other pressures, we're seeing that payouts are more complex than ever. The good news is that there's solutions to ease this operational burden, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about the growing pains with handling high volume payouts. We're going to share with you the key signs that you need a platform designed to handle high volume AP, and we're going to provide you with some strategies of what to look for when choosing an accounts payable solution. And as always, we invite you to ask your questions throughout the webinar using the chat tool on your screen. But before we do all that, I wanted to start with a poll question, which is about to be displayed on your screen. We want to know what percentage of your payouts are made electronically. All of them? 75% to 99% of your payouts are made electronically. 50% to 74% of your payouts are made electronically. 1/4 to 49% of your payouts are made electronically. 1% to 24%, or none. All of your payouts are made using paper checks. Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. So Omri, we know that everything in the business world changed about 2 years ago. Talk to me about payouts before the pandemic. What were the challenges that organizations faced then, and how have they changed over the past 2 years?
I think one of the most interesting in the past 2 years is that we've seen communication and approvals move to the digital space, if that makes sense, Mark. I would say that actually running ACH and cutting checks, doing international wires and domestic wires is relatively the same, but the means of communicating for, hey, Mark, can you please approve this bill payment, right, has changed. And we see more and more companies looking for a platform, potentially email approvals, and then an easier paper trail to track these communications because you can't necessarily just walk to someone at your office these days and ask them to do a pay run.
We know that many AP departments are relying on email for more and more tasks. Is that a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to payout approvals?
It depends how many payouts and how many emails you're going to get, right? I think at the end of the day, it's really important to consider that all of us can only handle so many emails per day. So, for example, if you're doing maybe 10 payment approvers per day, that's easy. But if you get a wave of 200, you probably don't want to do that over email. You might want to get a digest, right? That says, hey, Mark, there's 200 bill payments to approve. Let's review them in another screen where you can focus and actually think through, is this the right bill? Is this the right vendor? Do I have the right payment information and notification info? And you can go from there. So volume of AP really dictates the answer to that question.
We know that more organizations are making more of their payouts electronically, in large part because of the disruption caused by the pandemic. But I'm wondering if they've optimized those approvals as much as they've optimized the actual payment initiation. Is there a disconnect there, Omri?
Um, I'd say a little bit. Most companies that we have spoken to pre and post pandemic haven't changed as much of their I need to remit money process. They have completely changed their I need to figure out what needs to be paid when. So really looking at your aging reports, understanding what vendors are good to pay or not, and running the approvals. That's where we see a lot of the benefits of modern AP platforms today. It's helping cross-departmental stakeholders communicate on what should be approved and when can money be released.
We asked our attendees what percentage of your payouts are made electronically. Most of the attendees on the line today, Omri, are making most of their payouts electronically. Probably no surprise there. 31% of our attendees say that between half and 3/4 of all their payouts are made electronically. 29% of our attendees said 3/4 to 99% of their payouts are made electronically, and 2% of them aren't cutting a single paper check. Only 16% of our attendees are making less than half of their payouts electronically. What would be your message to the 16% are still pushing around a lot of paper, Omri?
That it can be better. At a high level, even if you have to send a check, you can now send a check with a button. I think that what's really important, and we'll get into this later when we have a case study that we'll cover, the process of chasing around a peer for an approval or to sit down and write a paper check is daunting. And the more you have of those, the slower your operations and your financial operations get. And I would just recommend to really look at the current volume of AP and ask yourself, what does it look like in 6 months? We'll get to this in a tiny bit. And just have an honest conversation of, can we keep running manual payments without electronic intervention?
You know, Omri, they did such a great job with that poll question. I think we're going to do one more. This time we want to know, what is the biggest payouts challenge that your organization currently faces? What is the biggest challenge when it comes to payouts that your organization currently faces? Does the process take too long? Does the process cost too much? Do you have inadequate visibility into things? Do you feel like it's too risky? Or is there something else that's keeping you up at night when it comes to your payouts? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. So at the risk of biasing our attendees, Omri, what is the thing that typically gets folks to call you in terms of what's keeping them up at night? What's the biggest challenge you hear from AP leaders who call into Routable?
Yeah, I'll stack rank it into three things. First of all, it just that takes too long. And it's not just the single I need to pay right now, it's the full process of I need to onboard a vendor. I need to figure out what is their payment method. Maybe they have or have not responded to my communication. Then I need to figure out when to pay, how to pay, and maybe your payment speed is slow. Maybe you're sending ACHs that take 5 days where you could prioritize for 1 day. So speed / taking too long is the number one. Two is costs. We have a lot of companies that are doing over 1,000 payables per month that come to us and have not optimized their costs. If they're expecting 10, 20% year-over-year growth, it's definitely something that you want to start managing over time. And three, I don't know if I would put it under risk, Mark, but I would classify it as controls, if that makes sense. We see a lot of new CFOs, VPs of finances, directors of accountings, and controllers come to us and basically said, hey, my team was running a manual process and we dealt with it with as long as we needed to. And not only do I want to automate it, but I also really care on who can view certain data, who can release funds. And I don't want to give all of my direct reports or peers at the company access to my bank account or access to my ERP, right? So then the conversation is, how do you distribute information without relaxing your controls? Those are the top three that I hear about.
Omri, has control been harder as a result of the shift to remote working?
I think it could be easier with platforms, but yeah, for sure. We see a lot of companies exporting data from their ERPs, sending CSV files to each other, running a lot of email back and forth threads, having confusion on what should be paid or not, making mistakes, delaying their process to pay. And I think that anytime you talk about one payment at a time, it's easy. But once you start talking about 100, 200, 1,000 payables at a time, it becomes really, really complex. I'm sure that you've seen in your days hey, these are all the bills we need to pay CSV export. Please upload them to your bank, right? For a notch file on. It's not the simplest thing to do. And even if you try to process the notch file and you make one mistake, the whole thing fails. So those communications aren't that easy to do over email. And that's actually something that might have been easier to do in Office.
That's right. We asked our attendees, what is the biggest payouts challenge that your organization currently faces? 30% of our attendees, Omri, say the process takes too darn long. 20% of our attendees say they have inadequate visibility. I wonder if that's some of the control you were speaking of. 18% of our attendees said things cost too much. 5% said it's all too risky. And 10% said something else is keeping them up at night. If you're one of those 10% who said it's something else, I'm not letting you off the hook this easy. Use your chat tool and let me know what it is your biggest payout challenge. When we get to the Q&A, I'll have Omri give you some advice. Omri, how do you reckon these results would compare if we had asked this question 2 years ago before the pandemic? Do you think the results would be similar, or do you think something else would have been the top of mind for the folks on the line today?
Honestly, the way it's stacked, it's I think it's just the same, to be frank. Working remotely definitely has its benefits. It has some of its detractors, but I don't see any, just from these results here in this poll specifically, I don't see a different stack rank to what we would see 2 years ago. So that is actually nice.
No matter what your challenge is, the fact is that those challenges become bigger as your volume grows. And to talk more about that, I'm going to hand it off to Omri. Omri?
Awesome. Thank you so much. So with this, we'll start going into defining what is high volume payouts, and specifically what is mass payouts. I'm going to shift here to our slides. Feel free to interrupt me at any point with the chat. Both Mark and I will be watching it. So if there are questions, I'm more than happy to pause and get into it. So we all know the definition of accounts payable, but what is mass payments? We have defined mass payments as when AP exceeds 500 monthly business payments. There's that transition where we've seen companies go from being able to handle one-off, manual, maybe non-automated AP, and typically around 500 payables per month is where we see the break of teams being frustrated with just having a manual process and being a little confused in how they're going to scale. We've seen burnout. I've walked into an office of 25 folks in finance and AP sharing documents back and forth. This was pre-pandemic, Mark, but trying to understand what do you need to pay. Um, More payables literally means more headaches. Errors, right? The more you pay, the more likely you are to make human error, whether it's a missed payment or a late payment, or it's just the fact that maybe you made a rounding error or you entered an extra zero. That's what approvals are for. So it's really important to notice that as you increase your payables per month, you're also increasing the risk that more mistakes could happen. Um, Obviously, scale matters. A lot of folks talk about high volume payouts, mass payments, but they forget about vendor onboarding and vendor management. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. Paying more people means more emails. More emails means, hey, when did my check get sent? Did the ACH go through? I don't see the money in my bank account. So having more visibility is extremely important. And we have identified also industries where this is painful. We see this in insurance companies, real estate companies, marketplaces, e-commerce companies, the gig economy specifically, and many more affiliate and just high volume business payment industries where tracking over 1,000, over 500 business payments a month is a lot of work. So we'll dig into this more and why you should start looking into an automated solution throughout this presentation. Mark, before I continue, any questions from your end? I want to include you in this too.
So what are the common denominators among those industries, Omri? Is it the challenges in tracking those payouts, or is there something else going on there? Because it seems like a lot of those industries are also pretty highly regulated too.
Yep. So I'll tell you two things. One, it's an increasing amount of vendors month over month or year over year. Um, that is the biggest leading indicators. If you have high volume vendor growth, that is something that is hard to tackle. And typically, finance will pass that on to an operations team and ask them to handle that. So that's kind of when it gets messy to decide who owns what. We actually, Mark, last month had a company that onboarded over 4,600 new vendors through our platform. It's a lot. I don't want to think about that more than making this comment. It's overwhelming. The other thing is consistently across the industries that I just described, paying vendors is part of their business model. So that's something that's very common, right? Whether you're working in manufacturing or insurance, the vendor payment process is actually part of your day-to-day business workflows. I think that there's a steep differentiation between, oh, I got to pay my annual Salesforce bill, right? Than the example of, oh, I need to pay out an insurance agent for commission, or I need to pay out a broker in real estate and so forth. So where you see high volume business payment scale again is lots of vendor growth month over month, year over year, and when there is actually the need to pay vendors as part of your business model.
So when you talk about lots of vendor growth, my mind instantly goes to high velocity companies who might not necessarily be a large AP department today, but they will in the very near future. So say I'm someone listening in on this conversation and I'm sitting at 350 or 400 payments, and I know my company's growth trajectory is going in one direction up.
Yeah.
When's the right time to automate this, Omri? Is it when I hit 500 or should I do it proactively?
I would do it proactively any day, right? I think
Why?
at that day, um, let me put it this way. We think about this a lot for other industries, right? When you have two salespeople, maybe you just send emails manually. And as soon as you have maybe a team of 5 to 10, you start investing in email marketing automation software to help them send more emails and grow. The same thing is for finance. I just believe that typically finance is so overburdened with everything else they have to do. And AP is something that is often neglected in terms of budgeting and resourcing for planning of how you improve it. So I would, as soon as you have over 100, 200 payables per month, in my opinion, John, I would look into it. I would have a conversation. I would say, how fast are we going to grow? And would we benefit from taking our time back and being able to focus on forecasting, budgeting, annual planning, tax season, right? We're kind of smack dab in the middle of it. So those are the conversations to start having internally.
Let's see where our attendees stand with the complexity of their payout process. That brings us to our next poll question, which is about to be displayed on your screen. This time we want to know, how has the complexity of your payout approval process changed over the past 2 years? Is it significantly more complex compared to 2 years ago? Is your payout approval process slightly more complex compared to 2 years ago? Is it unchanged? That might be a good thing. That might be a bad thing. Is your payout approval process slightly less complex compared to 2 years ago? Or is it significantly less complex? You are living the dream. Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. Omri, what's the single biggest driver of payout approval complexity?
I would just say seniority and experience with your current AP system. What I mean by that is, Mark, we see when typically when a finance team is larger than 5 to 10 people and an executive or leadership position is brought on, we see that as being the first indicator of increasing the complexity. It's not a bad thing, actually. You can introduce controls and approval processes. The second thing is, I would say, a shift in ERPs, if this makes sense. For example, in QuickBooks and Xero, there are less fields that you could use for triggering an approval. As you go into the enterprise ERPs, Sage, NetSuite, Workday, Dynamics, SAP, Oracle, you have more fields that could help you slice and dice your bill payments and your payables that can give you more control on how you want approvals to be run.
How has the increased turnover that many AP and finance departments are experiencing right now impacted the complexity of these approval processes?
Are you asking me? Apologies, or
Yeah,
the group?
yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it has made it more obvious that more than payment approvals should be run. I'd say in the previous 2 years, what we saw more consistently is to say, if a payment is over $100 or $1,000, run it through approval. And now what we're seeing is more control and thinking from finance leaders about location, department, is it a billable expense and so forth, driving the conversation. So really digging into what is the bill level data that needs to be approved prior to the payment level data that needs to be approved.
We asked our attendees, how has the complexity of your payout approval process changed over the past 2 years? This doesn't happen often, Omri, but we have a nearly even split down the middle. 32% of our attendees would say they describe their payout approval process as being more complex compared to 2 years ago. 30% say it's slightly more complex. 2% say it's significantly more complex. Their knees are buckling, Omri. Another 30% of our attendees say the process is slightly less complex or significantly less complex, and 24% say it is unchanged. Are you surprised at these results, Omri, or is this about what you expected?
This is about what I expected because, as I mentioned, two things will really lead to this a shift in leadership and a shift in ERP changes. While automating approvals and helping folks make sure that you have controls is a benefit, I don't think that the logic for why we should approve a bill payment has changed for most companies in the past 2 years outside of those two factors.
Let's go on to our next poll question, which is about to be displayed on your screen. This time we want to know, how has the amount of time that your team spends approving payouts changed over the past 2 years? How has the amount of time that your team spends approving payouts changed over the past 2 years? Are you spending significantly more time, 10% or more increase compared to 2 years ago? Are you spending slightly more time, up to a 10% increase compared to 2 years ago? Is it unchanged? Is it slightly less time, up to a 10% decrease, or is it significantly less time, a 10% decrease or more? Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed on your screen, and we'll discuss the results in just a moment. What's the single biggest time waster when it comes to traditional approaches to payout approvals, Omri? What is it that takes so long typically?
I would say reminding your peers that they need to approve something. I'm dead serious. It's just like any other thing, whether you use Slack or Microsoft Teams or email or you're in Office, if you ask someone to do something and they don't have a great means to track it and you don't have a good means to track it, it becomes really hard to figure out where in the process is it. And a lot of people wish they could just look at all of their payables that need approval, select them all and say, nudge the approver, right? But a lot of time is, I would say, wasted because there is an inconsistent path for figuring out when do I need to approve something when it comes to the approver's lens. And a lot of time is also wasted because there might not be enough clarity for what they need to approve. So increasing visibility and making it easier for the manager of all the approvals to figure out who needs to approve so they can pay is really, really critical.
36% of our attendees, Omri, are spending more time today on the payout approval process compared to 2 years ago. We asked our attendees, how has the amount of time that your team spends approving payouts changed? Over the past 2 years, 32% of our attendees say slightly more time, up to a 10% increase. 4% of you are spending significantly more time, 10% increase or more. That's a lot of time, Omri, 10% increase or more. What do you reckon is going on there?
A lot more vendors, a lot more payments, a lot more employees, right?
Just
You're
growth.
talking about yeah, just growth. You're talking about a process that um, just like you're going to introduce a new employee to your HR department, to their job, everything. I do think that some sort of introductory training into how the AP's policy works really helps. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot and saying to myself, how can Routable productize your AP policy and allow any employee who needs access to it to quickly understand this is how we move money at our company. I think if there is a source of truth for that, that can resolve a lot. And outside of that, Mark, again, like what we're talking about is if you don't have automation and you have over 200, 500, 1,000 payables per month that need to be approved, it's going to get harder and harder to track those down and ensure that you're doing the approval process in time. And then you're also tracking it in case you get audited or you need to correct a mistake.
So while you were reflecting on the complexity of your payout approval process, the time you're spending, you probably started wondering, well, geez, do I need an automated solution for my payouts? Well, Omri's going to share with you 3 signs that you probably need a platform designed to handle high volume payouts. Omri?
Thank you. I appreciate it. We covered some of this in our back and forth a little bit earlier, but it's good for us to hit on it again. So I'll walk you through 3 signs that you'll need a platform to help you scale out your payouts, specifically from the lens of your vendors and your team. One, I think driving empathy for your team is extremely important. And I think this goes beyond just finance. We see a lot of frustrated approvers from the marketing department, operations department, etc. Right? So it's always important to think about how your process today impacts your peers' times and how it's affecting your own team's time. The biggest thing that you want to do is to prevent burnout. I told this to Mark yesterday, actually. I walked into an office and they were signing licking envelopes and cutting 250 checks in a single day. I actually helped them out with this. We'll talk about this specific company in a moment. But I could tell that that team was a little bit demoralized. You want your AP team to help you look for mistakes and errors and to help speed things up. And I think it's really, really important to just ask yourself, can my team do more of the same? And if the answer is no, that's a key sign that you should start looking at automating your manual process. As we also talked about error, right? If your team is overwhelmed, you could introduce new errors. And for us, what we recommend is a mass payouts platform that automates your AP process can help you save 70% in manual labor. We've seen it equate to over 30 hours of labor per month. We actually seen some companies save over 400 hours per month. So it's really important to ask yourself, how many vendors am I paying? How many bills am I creating? How many bill payments need to be approved? What is my process today? And does that grow? Mark, any questions before I continue to the next slide?
No, that's really straightforward. I know these AP folks on the line know that burden well.
And just so you all are aware, I am happy to talk to each one of you. Whether Routable is a fit for you or not, all I care about is improving your team's workflows. I think that's the most important thing. The next thing here is a poor vendor experience. This is something that is often neglected, we see in conversations, but is starting to become more and more of a competitive advantage, Mark. If you work with a lot of vendors and contractors, it is essential that you keep your vendors happy. A vendor relationship is important to your business. Vendor communication is really important. Letting a vendor know, thanks, we have your bill, or thanks, we have the right payment method or file, or hey, Mark, you have 5 bills being paid across one payment, and it's supposed to be in your bank account within 2 days, or we cut a check today that's going to arrive by Friday. Those things are really important. If you have a poor vendor experience, one of the negative things that can happen automatically is you get more emails. So Mark, we talked in our previous polls about spending more time. It might be that you're increasing your AP volume and you're increasing the amount of vendors that you service. But if you're not thinking about their experience as well, you might be creating more pain for yourself by getting more, hey, Mark, when is my payment going to arrive? Questions, right? Or, hey, Mark, I didn't receive my payment. Or, hey, Mark, did you even see my last email? The more you are on top on collecting their W-8 or W-9, communicating with them, and really, really, really thinking about how you can remove friction from every vendor interaction, the more you can scale. Also, everywhere you can centralize communication is really important. We've seen teams do this over the phone, over multiple email addresses. Sometimes a single or AP clerk is the number one email that is given out in communication rather than a maybe group like ap@yourcompany.com. And I think that this can lead to a poor experience and potentially vendor churn. With an automated solution, you can really think about getting all communications with vendors into one place, all vendor data into one place, and you can easily update their payment methods from one location. I'm sure we have all received an email from a vendor saying, hello, Mark, we are now going to be changing the bank accounts where we need to remit money to. Having a quick way to recognize that and update your AP platform for, great, the next bill payment that goes to this vendor needs to go to the correct bank account. That's a small thing, but the mistake is sending money to the wrong bank account or the wrong check address, which you never wanted to do. Mark, any questions from your end before I go to sign 3?
I think if there's one lesson that we've learned over the past 2 years, Omri, it's that suppliers matter, right? Our supply chains are vital to the growth of our business. And when you deliver that exceptional experience that you're describing here, that's going to help us retain as well as attract valued suppliers, could help drive our company's growth. And when you have those great relationships with suppliers you described, well, now you're going to be in a better position to get good SLAs. You're going to be able to collaborate with your suppliers more closely to drive your product innovation. You're going to know they're there when you need them. So I think this is a really understated benefit of AP automation. And typically we think internally about the benefits, but you're absolutely right. Automation can really help us strengthen those relationships and drive a competitive advantage.
Awesome. And one more comment, I'd like to say this, and we actually see this consistently. If you're paying contractors and not like business suppliers, right? Entities, they
Little
ask more
B.
questions. Yep.
Yeah.
They ask 10 times more questions. They send you 10 times more emails. So the more you can get ahead of it and make sure that your payment communication and your vendor communication is clear, the more time that you'll save. So small things, but it reduces a lot of headaches. I'm going to move here to the third sign. I'd just call it integrating with other systems. It is really, really, really important that you pick a solution that works with your existing tools, that can integrate with your existing bank or bank accounts, that could be multiple, that talks to your ERP in real time, that is able to extend data wherever you need it. For example, Mark, more companies are now sending data for payments to something like Looker or Tableau. It's really important to start thinking about, how do I centralize all of my AP information? And then how do I make sure that it can sync and talk to other platforms in real time to make sure that the right people on my team can have access right when they need it? If you have, for example, an AP platform that does not talk to your accounting software or your ERP, you're going to be doing double entry, or you're going to be exporting CSV files from a payment processor or a bank account and forcing one of your team members to manually update that in your ERP. That is a very annoying process. We see it all the time. And anywhere you can give your finance team time back and improve your communication with other teams by making sure that data is communicated clearly, you're going to save a lot of time. So we highly, highly recommend that picking a solution that integrates with your current ERP is step one. And then two, think about who needs access to your transaction data, to your vendor data outside of your finance team, and how sharing that information safely can work well. Mark, any questions?
No, to expand on your point, 84% of all AP departments say that they are dissatisfied with the level of integration between their AP systems and their ERP. And yet the ERP is the financial nerve center of the business. So we've got to fix that.
It's the database, right? It's the thing that you always have to update every day. And anytime you introduce another step called manually updating the ERP, you're going to have more and more disgruntled people in your office, whether it's virtual or physical. And Mark, by the way, we gotta quote you after that, the 84%. I need to go get your source, because that's the number one thing we should put on our website. That's awesome.
You're welcome. See what you learn when you come to an IOFM webinar, folks.
Mark, we should get coffee all the time. All right, I'm going to move us forward, and we're going to go to a question here. Oh, sorry, I went one slide back. What should you look for when evaluating a high volume payouts platform? But before then, Mark, we have another lovely poll.
We do indeed. It is about to be displayed on your screen. This time we want to know, how many levels of approval does your organization require for payouts on average? How many levels of approval does your organization require for payouts on average? You don't have any formal levels of approval for payouts? It's the Wild West? Only kidding. 1 level of approval, 2 levels of approval, 3 levels of approval, 4 levels of approval on average, or more than 4 levels of approval on average. Take a moment to respond to the poll question now displayed in your screen, and we're going to discuss the results in just a moment. Are you seeing a change in the number of levels of approval that the typical company has for its payouts because of the concerns of fraud and compliance risks? Are organizations requiring more approvals, Omri?
I think it's more than that. So yes, I'm seeing an increase, Mark. I think that typically we see a lot of organizations maturing. I would say that about 3 to 4 years ago, it was a nice to have, and now we're seeing more and more finance leaders making this a need to have. Now, I also want to identify that there is bill level approvals and payment level approvals, right? So
Sure.
did we code this the right way? Did we get the right stakeholder say that this looks good? And then later on, do we want to release this amount of money, right? Do we have that authorization? Um, but we do see some companies that come to us with no approval process because it actually is the Wild West, as you were saying. They're growing so fast that nobody ever stopped to think twice about it. But more often than not, we do see very, very educated finance leader coming to us with either an existing approval system or a wish to improve their current maybe one level of approvals. And we're seeing data that it's pretty good here.
Yeah, this is reassuring. We can all sleep better tonight knowing. How many levels of approval does your organization require for payouts? It looks like almost 70% of our attendees, Omri, require either 2 or 3 levels of approval for payouts. 7% of you require 4 levels of approval. 2% of you say you've got more than 4 levels of approval on average. 1%, only 7% of you say you have 1 level of approval. Does this seem about right to you? Does this make you feel comfortable with this crowd, Omri?
The crowd is awesome. Yeah, we typically see 2+, right? I think that if you do truly break it into bill approvals versus payment approvals, you're quickly going to get into two, right?
What's the problem
And
with one
then
level of approval?
I don't say that there's a problem, my friend. It really depends on the size of your transactions, the amount of team members that you involve from other departments, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one level of approval could actually work really well with a siloed finance team where it's small, everybody has the same access to the same data, and there's no questions, and you're just basically saying, either did this get coded the right way and let's pay anything, or anything over $10,000 need to go to the CEO. We do see that a lot. But as companies mature their processes and bring in more stakeholders to the approval process, we do quickly see it jumping to 2, 3, and more.
Okay, so with so many of our attendees having so many levels of approval for payouts, clearly they need to automate. So how do we go about choosing the right automated solution, Omri?
Thanks for leading that. I really, really appreciate it. So first of all, it should integrate with your existing workflows. I think that a lot of today's software choices make you shift your existing workflows, and that should not be the case. In my opinion, what's really important is that you can run your existing process as you have it, but automated. Um, what I mean by that is a software platform that you may choose to integrate with should not make you sacrifice your current processes and what you like. If there's an options to innovate, awesome. But we should not, or any company should not be making you go backwards on your processes. Key things to think about is importing payables automatically. For example, not all payables and bills will be created in a AP platform. Sometimes they might be created in your ERP. Can this platform that you're looking at import those payables in real time and let you know when a bill was created in your ERP and not there? Can you keep track of money movement and know exactly when money was released and when it was delivered? Or can you explain to a vendor when something is going to arrive? Those are probably questions that you're asking today, and the clearer that is, the better. As I mentioned, can you maintain your existing level of approvals? That is important. What we want to innovate on is giving you more flexibility, saving your time, but not detracting from your AP policy today. You're also going to look at no code solutions for mass payouts. Let's say that you are doing over 500 payables per month mark, that is a great segue to start thinking about CSV file uploads. It sounds manual, but it can actually automate a lot, right? And if your platform that you're looking at can actually help you go from manual one-by-one data entry to maybe a manual CSV file upload, that is a great, great solution. If you do have engineering resources and you do have a team that wants to automate it even further, maybe you're crossing 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 payables per month. Sometimes speaking with your engineering team is super important, and having an API that your engineering team won't laugh at is critical. So modern APIs go a long way for helping automate payouts. And then a two-way sync with the ERP is really, really critical. Mark, any questions from your end?
And if I summarize the slide in just a few words, it's ensure you've got a frictionless flow of data.
Exactly. You should look for something that helps supercharge what you do today, not change.
There you go. Even better.
Awesome. So as we hit on this previously, vendor onboarding and communication. Done wrong, it can ruin your day or your month. Done well, it could be something that you stop thinking about because it's so seamless. So think about collecting banking, tax, payment preference information during vendor onboarding. Think about your vendor onboarding. What I mean by that is when you get a new vendor, do you input their ACH credentials into your system? Do you save their check address? Do you collect their W-9 manually? Or would you like them to do it? Do you want to reduce the liability for it? You also want to think about more payment methods equals less vendor friction. The faster you can send money, the more you can have visibility, the better. For example, Mark, we work a lot with real estate and insurance where having a specific stamp from USPS delivered on an envelope is really, really critical. And we help automate that, right? So it's very important for you to also think about what payment speeds, preferences do my vendors need, and am I able to supply those? As we mentioned previously, communication with vendors. Make sure that when you release a payment, that your vendor knows that it's on the way. Or if you prefer to control your communication yourself, that you have an easy mode for your team members to hit on. And then I think it's really, really important. You need to be able to look at a vendor status, a bill status, a payment status, all in one place per vendor. And last but not least, and this is something that we are unique in the industry, Mark, we don't believe that you should promote your AP platform's brand when you're dealing with your vendor. We have a very branded experience at Routable. What I mean by this, if you send a payment, it's going to come from your company. Your logo will appear, not Routable's. I think it's very, very critical to make your vendor confident that they're communicating with you. That's obvious, but also confident that the communications and the payment automation does not make the vendor sign up for a tool that they don't want to. I think that is very, very critical. That is bonus points, but I do think it's important.
I think you do all this and you end up with a stronger supplier relationship.
100%. The third thing that you should look for, it's the right payment experience. So as you grow, you might have domestic and international payments. I think it's really, really important to also think about if you have international, are you doing SWIFT? Are you doing local ACH? If you want more information on that, let us know. We have good education. But even just at a high level, understanding the preferences for your company in terms of transaction fees and what you need, make sure that currencies are supported. I'm sure a lot of you have currency settings in your ERPs. You want to make sure that that data goes through the right way. And you want to make sure to understand the payment status. Human error is more common than not, meaning it might be that your vendor gave you the wrong account number for a bank account and they're off by one digit. That would be an RO3 bank failure. Explaining to a vendor what happened and the delay of their payment status is really, really good. So having the most information on that is really critical. Having the ability to pick a speed and a payment method preference is really important. For example, Mark, you might have some of your vendors that you want to pay same day. Some vendors maybe you want to pay instantly, and other vendors you might want to pay in 10 to 14 days with a super slow check. And then again, having visibility and transparency in a currency conversion. I think we all know if we send, a check, it might cost us $1 to send a check. But if you're sending an international transfer or you're doing a real-time remittance, you might want to calculate the cost of a payment for yourself and have clarity on the currency conversion, because we all know if you try to pay someone in pounds and you pay them in US dollars, there's going to be that back and forth conversation, right, Mark? So it's also about saving yourself that extra conversation with your vendor and making sure that you have real-time data on currency exchanges.
Omri, we've just made history. I've been doing these IOFM webinars for more than a decade, and this is the first time that anyone has referenced an RO3 return code in any of
Oh, I
them.
love
So
it. I know like 27 of them.
congratulations.
I love it.
Well,
Great.
we only have 8 minutes left, so you'll have to keep that for the next webinar.
Sounds good. I have them tattooed on my arm at this point. And then last but not least, I think security and compliance. Whether security and compliance is reporting to your finance team or it's a separate function and you have a CISO, I think it's really important that you check how data is encrypted, how information is stored. Make sure that you don't have the liability of storing bank accounts, right? The platform that you integrate with should hold that liability. So I would triple check and get as much information as possible on the security of the platform and their level of compliance in-house. Really quickly, because we have 9 minutes left, Garmentory is one of those companies that I spoke about earlier, where I actually walked into their office and had to help them lick 250 envelopes. It was a terrible experience as they were sending checks manually. We introduced a check sending API that has their signature, their logo, check remittance information, and they never looked back on sending another check manually, which is pretty awesome. And moreover than that, we've been able to help them send domestic ACH payments and international transfers as well. We have saved them over 90 hours per month. And Seated is a ticketing platform. Seated is one of my favorite customers because not only have they reduce their manual process, they built the most beautifully branded vendor experience I've ever seen, Mark. They really care about their vendor communication, and these vendors are actually ticketing companies, venues, and so forth. They have to send them a lot of money, and they have built such a beautiful interface and communication portal using Routable's information to make it as frictionless as possible. I know I had to rush through those last two slides, but Mark, I want to hand it off back to you and see if we have any questions for the group with 7 minutes.
We do indeed. We're going to enter the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already asked your question to Omri, or if you've thought of an additional question, Omri, go ahead. Use the chat tool on your screen to send them to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question is from Brenda. She wants to know, are the average number of approvals based on the amount typically? And are there rules of thumb for how many approval levels there should be for certain dollar amounts?
So Brenda, great question. I don't think that there's a rule of thumb, but we do typically see a break in $0 to $1,000, $1,000 to $10,000, and $10,000 to $100,000 and above. That's a high level pattern that we see. Now, each company is going to have a different level of settings on their payment approvals. But the most common thing that we see, Brenda, is at least one bill level approval to make sure that something was coded the right way or a payment is intended to go out to a specific vendor, and at least one payment level approvals. And that payment level approval might be anything under $5,000, let the finance team automatically pay, and anything over 5,001 cent go to an executive to approve as well.
Sushil writes, our biggest payout challenge is validating bank account details. How does
Mm.
Routable help with that?
We have multiple ways. So, one, you can always send a link to a vendor to add their bank account on their own. And we actually do a real-time authentication to their bank and can not only confirm that the bank account is valid, however, we can also go a step further and confirm that the business entity is the real owner of that bank account. Two, we have the traditional micro deposit workflow, right? You want to add a vendor, you want them, this is your option to confirm it with micro deposits, 2 small deposits that appear in 2 days. They can enter that information and you can make sure that there is validity of that bank account prior to doing so. And last but not least, using our platform um, for routing numbers, we tell you if, in real time if it's a valid routing number. We connect to many databases and we constantly update it to make sure that you are never entering a wrong routing number throughout our platform.
I think we have a related question here from Marie. She wants to know whether the solution supports OFAC and sanctions clearing. And obviously sanctions are on the front page of the newspaper these days. So how does Routable handle that?
That's a great question. So first and foremost, we do have transaction monitoring on everything that we do. So at a high level, if we find a payment to be potentially fraudulent or sanction related and so forth, we will reach out to you in real time and message you and say, hey, we think there could be something wrong here. That is the first level of data. The second thing that we haven't introduced yet, but I literally was working on it with my team yesterday, is we're looking into supporting real-time TIN, so EIN or SSN checks for contractors and businesses, as well as supporting a real-time OFAC check for vendors onboarded. Now, keep in mind, in order to do that, you will have to ask the vendor to provide their W-9, but it is a great step, or W-8 to be specific for those international vendors. But we're looking into automating that because we want to give each one of our customers a confidence score that that transaction is valid, that the bank account or payment method is valid, and that the vendor is really who they are.
Cheryl wants to know, does Routable help migrate our suppliers from paper checks to electronic transactions, or is that something
We
we
do.
would handle?
No, we do. Our process is very consultative. It's about starting a conversation. So, for example, first and foremost, we can automate your paper checks right off the bat. Let's say you have 1,000 vendors and you have 1,000 addresses for those vendors. We can upload those into Routable and we can help you automate just that process. Now, as a second step, you could also either, if you have their ACH information or their wire information, etc., elsewhere, that is very easy to add manually, or you can send every one of your vendors a branded link for them to upload that information on their own securely, where you don't have to manage that risk. We do this all the time. We actually recently onboarded a client that was doing 5,000 manual checks per month. Now, they've switched to Routable and they're doing 5,000 automated checks per month. And we're slowly but surely helping them collect the right bank account information per vendor as well to have that as an option where they can say, if bank account information is available, let's send them that, else let's send them a check.
Brianna wants to know more about your cross-border payment capabilities.
I got you. So right now, Brianna, we're supporting over 50 countries and we'll have about 100 countries by the end of the month. Towards the end of June, we'll probably be up at 200. And one more thing that we've noticed is that almost all of our customers who do cross-border payments also need an integration to PayPal. So our team has started work to make sure that we can build a great solution, not just through Routable, but we can also help you automate PayPal payments because sometimes the country that you need to pay is not supported by Swift.
And that will be our final word. Omri, thanks so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us today. And thank
Thank
you
you.
all for taking time out of your busy days to join us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jovi. Ms. Jovi.
Thank you, Mark. That's all the time we have for today's program. I just have a few quick housekeeping notes to go over before we officially close out. If you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear once you close the webinar, this will better help us serve your needs in future webinars. And as a reminder, the on-demand materials will be emailed to everyone within 2 business days. This will include a PDF of the slides as well as a link to the recording of today's presentation. Thank you again to Mark and Omri for a great presentation today, and thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. This webinar was brought to you by IOFM and sponsored by Routable. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.